Have you no hope at all? And do you really live with the thought that when you die and nothing remains?
The Sad Boys Book Club.
My mom died today.
Did you read me
Or yesterday, maybe. Standing on the beach with a book in my hand.
Magic 8 Ball Meursault says, I don't think so.
I'm alive, of course, but I'm also dead. I'm the stranger, doing a podcast.
Bang, 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 bang.
What?
I said bang 5 times. Like an echo. Bang, 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 bang.
Are you trying to reconstruct a crime scene or something?
I'm a gun.
You're the gun.
I'm a gun. When I was a kid, I always said, when I grow up, I want to be a gun.
What kind of low caliber amateur hour is this? You gotta bring a little heat to it. You gotta bring a little bit of like, a little bit, bang. What's that? Come on, try it again.
Bang, 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 bang.
Okay, I'm gonna honor your intent to improve that. So thank you for that. But welcome to the Sad Boys Book Club. I am Daniel,
And I'm the stranger, killing an Arab.
Oh, that. So you ended up listening to the Cure song after all.
I did, yes. Actually, like 5 minutes ago.
Oh, I actually really, like I said at the end of the last one, I always thought that it was pretty cool. It's like the concept of doing an I don't know. How they have like movie adaptations of books. It was kind of like a song adaptation of a book. I don't know. I've always thought that was really cool. I don't know if I mentioned this. I probably did mention this last time, but when I was really getting into The Cure, when I was in like high school and early college, I was listening to some of their stuff, and when I heard that was really kind of the impetus for checking out this book the first time around.
Were you also at that time writing a song about your fiance, but didn't finish it before she left you standing at the wedding altar, so you finished the song in a different tone?
Actually, I don't really like to talk about this much. It's kind of a difficult subject. But no, I didn't. That was not me.
So, anyways, The Stranger Part 2, and the end of The Stranger, since this is a very, very short novella of sorts. Boy, I have some thoughts about this, and this is such a weird book, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
I was really kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I was kind of, I don't want to say hard on part 1, but I didn't really love it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. It just kind of felt like a mix of just mundanity and lethargy. Like, I just kind of was like in this, it's like I was reading molasses, to put it one way. And it's not so much to say that it was bad, but it just kind of felt weird. Like I was just reading some dude's diary who had nothing interesting to say. And I think that was the point. I think a lot of having the context of part 2, I think the mundanity and the sociopathic, in a sense, emotionlessness of Meursault is kind of the point that you need, the context that you need to really understand why part 2 goes the way it does.
Mm-hmm.
which is not to say that suddenly I feel enlightened and part one is this masterclass of storytelling. I don't feel like I've suddenly changed my view on it. I do still think that it is a very mundane part to read, and it didn't feel like a slog. I should say it did not feel like a slog. I'm not sitting there being like, this book sucks, because it doesn't. But I understand part one a little better now, having read part two.
Yeah, yeah. I felt that way too during my initial read, and I just kind of had that, since I had that in the back of my mind as I was reading this the second time around. I kind of knew that some of the things, even though they seem kind of mundane, they are important to kind of really set up the character of Meursault.
Yeah. My biggest takeaway though from so when does this book take place?
It probably took place around the time it was written, so it took place during the occupied Nazi occupied era of France. So in the early 40s.
I never got any sense of German influence over Paris.
Well, this book doesn't take place in Paris. It takes place in...
It's in Algiers, right?
Yeah, it takes place in the French colony of Algeria.
So was there no, like... I'm sorry, I'm not, like, super well versed with a lot of how the German occupation of France went. Did that not really affect Algeria very much? At least not to the extent that I would be seeing it in this book.
I mean, I'm sure it did affect it in a lot of ways, but I mean, I think it doesn't, for the purposes of the book itself. I don't think it's gonna really like majorly change too much, you know?
Okay.
Because a lot of the things, like one of the things I kind of want to talk about, and we can circle back, but just like it's not necessarily the occupation that's going to make the court, so the case of the facts of the case are essentially, as you'll see during the trial, are essentially a non-issue, as is essentially the victim of the case, is basically, as you'll see when we cover that part, essentially just a non-issue. They don't really even talk about the victim or the crime even. But that's I feel like that's more but since it was a French colony, right? And so since the French had already had this sort of colonial like superiority mindset over the native colonized Arab peoples, that's not going to change, right? It's like they already had that pre-existing the sort of superiority, and they're not seeing them as people, as equals, you know.
Yeah.
So that's the Nazis are going to make them more racist against Arabs and whatnot.
Yeah, and I feel like my biggest takeaway from part two is, I don't know if I should extend this to the French as a whole or keep it purely confined to Algeria, but their justice system sucks and is stupid.
Well, I mean, I would say it's probably French, because it's not the Algerian people, that are running the things. It's the French that were in control at the time.
Yeah, like I think we can safely say, knowing the context that we know, since we are witnessing everything through the perspective of Meursault himself, I think we can safely say he is guilty of, at the very least, was it second-degree murder?
Sure. I'm not a legal scholar when it comes to, the various crimes, but is second-degree murder when you is it like it's murder but not premeditated?
Yeah, I needed a refresher here, so I just Googled it. It says second-degree murder is defined as an intentional killing that was not premeditated.
Yeah. I think I mean, personally, I would say yes to that. and that's and again we'll circle back to that, but the French or not the French necessarily, but the court imputes a sort of premeditation to him, but I don't think a reading of the text, either in the most generous to Meursault, nor like if the text does not support it, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with the text itself, we are given about as much of the facts as we could. So we're given a little more context, a little more idea of what happened more than any person in a jury would, just by proxy of us being the reader. So I think I could safely feel like I could rule him guilty of second-degree murder because of that. But, oh my God, I'm sure we can talk about this more in a minute with the trial itself, but I was so frustrated with the prosecutor in this trial. Like, we can go more into it in a bit, but I hate it. I was so pissed off reading how this trial went. And it wasn't because I'm sitting here thinking, oh, Meursault's innocent, he should be let go, because he's an innocent man who was just defending himself from the Arab that he walked up to, he pulled the gun on, and he instigated the action in. But, like, I don't know. I wanted him to be sentenced, to be found guilty, and have a sentence appropriate for his crime. And instead we got... I feel like to call it a kangaroo court would have been really downplaying how ridiculous this trial was.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say, and I think that is a large part of the intent of Camus here.
Yeah, and as I understand it, my takeaway from this novel is, and I think it having its initial English release being called The Outsider in the original translations, I think also does not necessarily maybe have a little more of a fitting epitaph to this than The Stranger would, but I think it fits in a different way with how my takeaway from this is Meursault is someone who can be seen as an outsider to society because of the fact that he didn't cry at his mom's funeral, and that's really it seems. And so, fuck it, kill him. And it feels like a rejection of non-normal from society, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're that's spot on. I think that's what Camus is trying to say with all of this. It's not the crime.
One.
It's the perception. It's how society, irrespective of the facts, how society, like you're following the norms or not following the norms is what condemns you.
Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe this is just me having the context of living in quote unquote the modern age. Living in insert year here. And so my idea of social politics is a bit different than how people would have seen it 80 years ago. But, like, I'd have to think that there had to exist at least some group of people that had some sense of a higher morality to think that he's not just some monstrous killer who's just waiting to go on another killing spree and murder your child or your wife or your dog because he had the audacity not to show emotion at a funeral. It's just it. I wonder. I don't know for certain, but I wonder if part of the intent from Camus was satire, or not necessarily satire, but like dark humor.
I think. I mean, I don't know for sure. I mean, obviously, look. So obviously, courts are very subjective things. We like to pretend societally that they are these true arbiters of truth and logic and rationality, and I think that's something that society writ large has probably convinced itself of since there's been courts. Certainly in the modern era, I'm sure that was if you were to really pro courts and in the legal system, working in the legal system, what they would say, or some variation thereof.
It kind of makes me not ever want to be in a situation where I'm being judged by a jury of my peers, because man, if all it takes is just one passionate prosecutor to really just throw the facts out the window and just finger point at me to sway them that way, I don't want to trust in that system. Which I realize this is basically an anecdotal thing, but still, it kind of throws a suspicion into the system as a whole.
I think there's two things I want to touch on here really quickly. One, I would like to see conviction rates and sentencing. See how that's adjusted for trials that are adjudicated by juries and by people that are just the people that are just tried by the judge. I'd be curious to see what the different rates are and the different average punishments for crimes are. I think there could be something to what you're saying. It'd be kind of interesting I think that'd be an interesting question to explore. Secondly, I think that I don't know this for sure, but I feel like there's also this element of, yes, the court does exist, because the idea of the trial by your peers and all that. I think that makes it a good potential metaphor for society as a whole. It's yes, in the purposes of this narrative, they are a court, and yes, courts probably can be and have been swayed by specious arguments by prosecutors. I'm certain of that. But I think part of what Camus is getting at here is this sort of, in addition to perhaps a critique of the legal system, is it's a critique of society. It's society will condemn you, based on whether or not you are falling into their perceived norms.
Yeah.
As part 2 opens up, we see Meursault has been arrested. He's been taken to prison, and that's where he had to start it. A lot of the time, at least at this point, he talks to. Let's see, I think he's approached, and I think there's some guys that No, it's not some guys. It's his lawyer, right? He talks to his lawyer, and his lawyer is asking him whether or not he was sad when his mother had her funeral, and Meursault is basically just he does his usual thing where he's like, well, I don't analyze myself. I probably did love my mother, but that doesn't really mean anything. And so, needless to say, even the lawyer, even the guy that's supposed to be on his side, is already a little bit he's already a little bit disgusted with him. So that's kind of the beginning of this theme that we will see to kind of take us through the end. At the next point, I think. Let's see. That's when he went to go talk to the magistrate, right?
I think that was after the meeting with his lawyer. He goes to the magistrate a couple times after that.
Yeah, that's true. The one thing that I'll probably kind of gloss over a little bit here, but probably should be noted, is this idea that during this time, it's not just like each chapter is a day or parts of a day. Like, this is a process that drags out over the case of the whole investigation and trial.
It seems like it's the better
Portion.
part of 2 years.
I know at one point he references 11 months, but I bet there's probably, I bet, if I were to look at other parts, you're probably right that was a gap of 11 months, and then there's several other months or months long span besides.
So my understanding of it is the investigation portion was the first 11 months, and then after that was when he was taken to prison awaiting the trial after the investigation. And then he says that it had become summer again, and like his trial was going to be in like June or something.
Mm-hmm.
So my understanding of that was there was the initial 11 months, and then he was put into prison, and then we come back around to summer again, because this all happened in summer. So it's been, my understanding is it's been almost, if not 2 years at this point.
Okay, and then I think there's some couple months after the trial,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly.
Yeah, while he's waiting.
Yeah. Okay, so he's talking to the magistrate, and then this sort of central question, reemerges. This idea of, did you love your mother? And then he gives his, I love my mother as much as anyone does. That kind of thing. The magistrate, also asks him why he, and this is potentially to figure out like what kind of charges they're gonna put on him. Why did he pause between the first shot and his subsequent 4 shots? And then he really seems to harp on that detail, and I think that's I don't think Meursault quite picks up on why, and I as the reader didn't really either, but I think that's why, if I had to put a chip down somewhere. And then there's this really strange interlude where the magistrate finds this little crucifix, and he's kind of waving it around, and he's asking Meursault if he believes in God, and Meursault says no. This is the wrong thing from the perspective of the magistrate to say, because this is something that sort of affronts him quite a bit, and I think it does kind of go later to in how they how he is judged later, and so the magistrate talks about how his faith is how important it is to him, and how essentially his life would be meaningless if he doubted the existence of God. And then he tells Meursault that he has, how did he put it, a hardened soul, impossibly hardened soul, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another part, like when this goes to trial, is they talk about how he's, they go on and on about how incredibly evil and destructive he is, and how they say he has no soul and all that stuff. That's one of the things that that's kind of like the genesis of how this will of how that kind of idea reemerges later on. So then I think we see Meursault is he I'm trying to remember how chapter 2 begins again. I think it's when he's in his I think he, I think I said something incorrect. I think the first chapter of part 2, I don't know if he was in jail yet.
Chapter 1 was during the investigation. I think he was being held. As I understand it, he was being held in jail, and then chapter 2 is when he gets taken to prison.
Okay. I think that's right.
Because he says every time after he would talk with the magistrate, he'd be handed back over to the police.
Okay, that must be what it is, because that's right, because I remember in chapter 1 he also, he was asked, what the old "what are you in for" by some Arab inmates, and then he says, "Oh, I killed an Arab," and then that caused them to be a bit more circumspect of him as a person.
Yeah,
Very
I love
understandably so.
I love how they're just like all joking and giving him shit, and they're like, "Oh, hey, what are you in for?" He's like, "Killing an Arab," and they're like, "Here's how you use your bed, sir."
Yeah, it was. It's pretty. So the next part, chapter 2, he's in prison. Actually, you know what? I'm looking at the book right now. Yeah, he said that I was put in a room. They were full of several other prisoners, most of them Arabs. They laughed when they saw me. When they asked me what I was in for, I said I killed an Arab, and they were all silent. Okay. For some reason I thought that was in chapter 1. I thought that was the beginning of chapter 1. Oh well. Anyway, so the main point of this is that this is when he has his visitations, right? So
More like visitation. He only gets the one.
that's true. It's just Marie and not doesn't he talk to his lawyer? I mean, that's maybe not the same. That's not a visitation, I guess, but
Yeah, he meets with Marie the one time, and man, I don't ever want to be in that situation. How he describes how visitation works, because that sounds awful.
yeah. It's kind of it's pretty bad. Marie comes to visit him. She's telling him, that she's trying to keep up an optimistic, positive face. She's telling him that he's going to be acquitted, that they're going to be married. They can do they can do those things that he likes to do, like going swimming and all that stuff. She's essentially trying to lift his spirits.
I can just imagine. She's like, "We can do all the things you like swimming."
That's pretty much. That's basically what it is. Because I mean, that was basically what their relationship was.
Yeah.
But but during this case, or during this during the visitation, like Dusty was saying, there's a lot going on. It's very hectic. People are experiencing a lot of extreme emotion. There's this guy sitting beside him that's obviously experiencing a bit of an emotional breakdown. It's really chaotic. It's really hard, and I imagine it's probably pretty much still what it's like. It's just a bad situation all around. But anyway, she leaves, and I think as you point out, that was the only time she was able to visit him, because they were not actually married at the time of his arrest. So she was told that she could not visit him anymore. And we also see Meursault is kind of struggling to, I guess, become okay, or just to no. What am I trying to say? Meursault he's in jail, and it's difficult for him because he misses his old life. He thinks about wanting to swim, wanting to smoke cigarettes, wanting to have sex with Marie, that kind of stuff. That's kind of weighing on him a lot at first, because that's kind of the way that we kind of have understood his character to this point. Also, is like he doesn't necessarily have too much of an interior life, so it's his being imprisoned, at least at this point, is not really impacting him psychologically. It's just so much the idea that I can't do these other things, the other things that make me me, from his perspective. He does like this. I remember he also they talk about how he passes the time, and he says things like, "Oh, I found this very funny. Like this idea of him imagining his old apartment."
Yeah, that was weird.
That was a very Meursault reaction to being in jail, I would say.
Yeah, it was very strange, just him being like, "Well, I guess I'll just imagine walking around my apartment."
Now that I think about it, I guess you could do way worse. I mean, there's probably it probably is comforting. The idea of of a time and place where you weren't imprisoned. So I guess I could see that. But it does sound very strange in the abstract. And then then there's this little interlude where he has this little story. He reads the story from a newspaper where a Czechoslovakian man, he leaves his hometown where he was born, and he goes to seek his fortune, right? And he leaves his mother and his sister behind. And they run this local inn in the village where he's from. And he gets this idea where he's going to come back and show, his, and it's been many years, and he's going to show his mother and his sister that he's made it big, and he's become a wealthy man. So he gets this idea, and he goes to he returns to his village that he comes from, and he goes to check in and stays at the inn. His mother and his sister somehow don't recognize him. So he decides to kind of roll with this, and he does some very like ostentatious kind of like displays of his wealth and that kind of thing. And this kind of triggers something in the mother and his sister. And that night after he like goes to bed, they break into his room and they kill him and they rob him. Then later on, his wife comes along, because I think the idea was he was supposed to go first, and then his wife would follow along after he's established himself, and they're everything's all good. So his wife comes along, and then she reveals to the mother and sister who he was. I don't think she knows that they killed him. At which point, his mother and sister, they realize what they've done, and then they kill themselves. Meursault, he basically says something to the effect of, this, I must have read that story 1,000 times. On the one hand, it wasn't very likely. On the other, it was perfectly natural. Anyway, I thought the traveler pretty much deserved what he got, and you should never play games. So there's some there. So that's kind of interesting. It's like this idea that he's, and I tend to agree with Meursault's characterization that it's not like super likely, but it kind of serves more as a parable and as a way to understand. I would say, like from a literary perspective, it was Camus, maybe a little bit of a commentary on, especially, well, not especially, sensationalistic media has always been a thing, but the sort of sensationalistic media, the idea of stories that can be published in news media, that if you really give them a lot of thought, there's basically no way they could be transpired as, like, events could have transpired as presented, or perhaps even transpired at all. That kind of idea. And it also kind of gives you like this idea of Meursault's very, I would say, bracingly and perhaps aggressively honest worldview, right? So he says that when he says the traveler pretty much deserved what he got, and you should never play games. That's something that we see from Meursault pretty much. He's almost honest to a fault, like he will, even when it does not benefit, as he does, as we see when he's being questioned about his, do you believe in God? Did you cry at your mother's funeral? Things that it would be advantageous for him to represent himself in a way that is not authentic. He is unable to do so, because he is just kind of like, he's unflinching. He's like the seemingly the dishonesty is not really. It just does not he's just not a dishonest person. That's one of the reasons why I think you can, to kind of circle back to something Dusty mentioned earlier. We can pretty fairly conclude that this is a a second degree murder situation, because he is just, his character is that he doesn't lie even when it would benefit him to do so.
Yeah, it definitely. I think part of it is. I don't know. Would you? This could be my ignorance towards certain types of mental health showing, but would you say that Meursault is at least in some way on the spectrum?
Um, I think that's something that I've kind of I thought a little bit about, and that was something I remember thinking about when I was getting ready to do the initial our initial episode. Um, at least when I was reading those early chapters, I think there's a good argument to be made. I know there's something. I don't know, like the way he may struggle with certain social cues. Um, like we see at in the first part of the book, that I think there is I don't know that Camus knew what, I mean, I don't know what the state of mental health research and all of that kind of like psychology and all, how the state of that research was, and I don't know if Camus knew those things. But there is I think an interesting case to be made that he does have some sort of, or he is on the spectrum in some way.
Yeah, because I do feel like there is a lack of social interaction and maybe a bit of social etiquette with him that I guess it definitely, we definitely would say that it creates a lot of the issues that he faces in his trial. And I think that you can look at the stigma toward him for that as, I don't know, maybe this is me extrapolating or insinuating too much, but maybe looking at it as also, and maybe this is also me looking at this with a modern context, and this may not be what Camus was going for, but looking at it also as a stigma toward mental health.
I mean, I think that could, even if Camus didn't literally think this idea of like, I am writing this because people that are on the spectrum are being discriminated against, or people that suffer from mental health difficulties are being discriminated against, which contemporaneously, yes, they definitely were, especially, particularly by the Nazis. But the this but I think that is true just in general, and I think that is part of his broader critique, is like this, the idea of people that do not fall within certain societal norms and expectations are basically condemned to be or basically condemned. That's, I think that does fit, even if he didn't have the words for it exactly. That does fit within his broader point, and I think it is part of the broader point that he's making.
So now we have Meursault's trial, and as I've alluded to earlier, it's such a mess, man. This prosecutor is, oh, I hate him. So to do a brief summation before diving deep into it, basically Meursault is sentenced to death because of his actions at his mother's funeral, not because of his actions towards the Arab. And I am just baffled by it.
Yeah, like I cannot stress enough how little, like, the actual facts of the case seem to be part of the prosecution's case against Meursault, or just are even discussed whatsoever.
Yeah, like it always keeps looping back to his mother. And I understand that part of the prosecution's ploy, and I imagine this would be used in any case like this, even today, part of the ploy is to set up a character file, so to say, for the jury to say, well, if he acted this way in this situation, then you can see how emotionless and how psychotic or cold or inhuman he was towards this murder. But like I said, I can understand that being used as a form of like establishing character, but it doesn't really do anything for establishing motive, causation, or really the murder itself. It's so grossly unrelated to the murder, and I just and okay, I'm jumping around. I'm a little scatterbrained, so I'm jumping around a little bit. But also, his characterization of Marie is just disgusting. He basically, without saying it, calls Marie a whore, just because her and Meursault started a relationship the day after his mom's funeral. And it's like, first off, everyone handles grief separately. Some people handle grief physically. Like, a lot of people, they will handle grief by having a physical interaction with a loved one. That's totally common. Some people shut down. Everyone handles it differently. So him finding physical comfort in Marie, a woman that he had, and this is something that we know as a reader, so this is maybe something that we get the benefit of knowing through reader omniscience, but it's someone that he had an established relationship with that he was never able to act on. Pure chance finds her, and they rekindle this almost romance from the past. And even in the court trial, she says that they had known each other from their time working together. But is it really so crazy to think that he found comfort in her in a time of grief? This isn't what happened, but just looking at it through the context of somebody on the outside looking in, the dude's mom just died, and the next day he tries to emotionally escape from it by trying to do the things that he enjoys and finding comfort in a companion that he had in the past, or at least attempted to have in the past. I feel like that's not a logical leap, even though, once again, like I said, we know that that's not exactly what happened. Meursault is someone who just didn't really feel anything, and that was just kind of him going back to his normal routine, and they just kind of happened to know each other. It was just any other Saturday, so to say. But still, if you don't know that, is it really so crazy of a leap to see him trying to do something to either A, try and hide the grief from him, distract from it, or find a way to cope with it? Like, it's just, the fact that the prosecutor's just like, this whore came in and the day after he buried his mom, he had sex. Like, it's just some condemnation of character, and it's so disgusting. And I want this fictional lawyers that lived 80 years ago. I want the bar to remove his license as a lawyer, because this is gross and I hate it.
Yeah, that is definitely true. I think that was very, it does kind of, and I think that's kind of intended, one of Camus' intended criticisms here of, or his ideas that he's putting forth here, is this idea of like how kind of shallow, it's superficial, and just on its face ridiculous a lot of these judgments of character are by the prosecutor, certainly, but also at a broader level, like society. Because I think you make a very solid point. And the only thing I would like to add specifically is he also takes issue with the movie they saw, which was a comedy, and he makes a whole issue out of how the fact that they saw a comedy, which again, it seems like it about as like innocuous a choice as you could make, right? You're feeling bad, you watch something funny. That to me, that seems like patently obvious. Like, why wouldn't you want to see that? Unless, again, everybody processes things differently. But like, I would not at all question that that idea of someone wanting to watch something kind of more like happy or something that would make them happy in that time. But he definitely does make a big issue about the fact that they watched a comedy when they went on their date.
And I'm amazed that this never came up in the line of questioning. He never laughed at the movie, if I remember correctly.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think he did. But then again, I don't know. That doesn't really help their case. So they probably can just elide that detail.
Yeah, and this definitely would not help Meursault if this detail was brought up. But the only thing I really remember from their little excursion to the movie was him making a point saying that he fondled her breasts the whole time.
Yeah, that would definitely not help Meursault there, but yeah, that is kind of keeping with his sort of like sort of physically oriented view of the world.
Yeah, and I have to wonder if part of this, so a big part of it seems like both the magistrate, the chaplain, and the prosecutor is coming from a heavy Christian influence. And I don't want to get into a big theological debate of the rights and wrongs of religion, but I do feel like there is at least some form, and this could just be me extrapolating something that isn't there, but I feel like there is some sort of form of, in some sects of Christianity, a very puritanical stance towards women and sexuality. To where it's like they weren't married, they had sex, of course she's a whore, and of course he is Satan incarnate for doing this. Which, I don't know, maybe this was something that was more common in the 40s to have that be such a widespread thing. I mean, you can look at history in general and see that treatment of women, even today, is not quite where it should be. So maybe that is part of it, but I feel like when people make arguments like this in condemnation towards somebody, they're using their religion as a tool for their personal ideology and not as something that you would use religion for. Like, I don't think they're using it ethically correctly, is I guess what I mean by that is, because it's not so much saying I am a Christian and this is what it means to be a Christian. It's them saying, I am a Christian and I'm going to use that against you when I don't think that's what the point of Christianity would be in this context. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, they're using their religion as a weapon when that's not at all what the point of the religion is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. They're weaponizing that and they're weaponizing any kind of sympathies that the jury has, in that respect. So they're like to use that as like not just like an appeal to authority in the sense of like, well, this, I am a religious man and this is so therefore this is correct. It's also kind of appealing to like do you consider yourself a good person? Do you consider, that kind of thing? And so trying to get them, like, to, if there's any questions that they may have about the case or how they view the character of Meursault, that it's supposed to play on their pre-existing beliefs and biases, I would say.
Yeah, I've used this term multiple times now to describe the prosecution, but it feels so apt. It's just disgusting. It really feels like a bastardization of justice to a person who, like I said earlier, is guilty of murder. There is no question. And even his defense is not trying to do otherwise. His lawyer's just like, he is guilty of murder with explanation. And the whole point is to try and get him, not to get him off, but to get him a lighter sentence, because it's not something as cut and dry as cold-blooded murder, even though it kind of is. But that's obviously the defense isn't going to try and paint it as that. But
I think what they're trying to do is try to like get him like manslaughter or just a lesser, sub murder charge.
yeah, and I don't know. There's I hate this prosecution so much, and the witnesses they pull so many from the nursing home because, as we've said before, he's on trial for what he did in chapter 1, not for what he did in chapter 5 or 6 or whatever, whenever the murder happened. He's on trial for that because the murder doesn't matter. The murder is just the conduit in which they've used to condemn this man. But they have the. Can you believe that this man, on the day of his mother's funeral, drank coffee and smoked a cigarette? Can you believe that? Surely he deserves death. Like,
Yeah.
that's a legitimate argument that they make. I can't believe it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's just and that's I think that's really the thing that Camus is really putting. That's his critique here that he's making of society. He's like there is no rhyme or reason to what they're saying. They're like I've said before. This is a fact, essentially an almost fact-free prosecution. Like there is very little, like astonishingly little about the facts of the case, about the victim. And I think I hasten to point that out again. It's like this idea that this yes, they are here and they're going to convict and kill Meursault, but there is basically no recognition of the victim nor the humanity of the victim. It all comes down to this idea of, as you say, you're punishing Meursault for not crying at his mother's funeral.
Yeah. And I love how when they bring oh god, I forgot his name again. The
Salamano?
No, not Salamano, the other neighbor, the one who the Arab was actually coming after.
Raymond.
Raymond, thank you. When they have Raymond come up as a witness, they put Raymond on trial for a second there.
Yeah.
And like you're a disgusting, horrible human being, and if he's friends with you, what does that say about him? And it's like
You're doing guilt by association.
yeah, and maybe there is something to be said about Meursault's his what's the word I'm looking for here? Him being an accomplice toward Raymond's acts towards the Arab sister, which I want to point out, unless I've missed something, I don't think we ever get any of their names, the woman or her brother.
No, that's what I'm building at. It's like this idea that they are totally dehumanized. Like they do not matter to the colonial, white supremacist mindset of the court. It's their identities, their lives are almost beside the point. We don't know their names. They don't even make an effort to bring other witnesses, the other Arabs that were with the brother earlier during that day. They don't bring his sister, who had seen who had seen Raymond or who had been a part of this case. Because that's where this all comes back to, is like this quarrel between the Arab sister and Raymond and his physical mistreatment of her. It's like that. All of that is sort of swept under the rug. So and there's some other witnesses that are called to the stand that are a little more, that they're more pro Meursault, but they're kind of even their testimony it can be kind of twisted. So they also bring to the stand let's see Mason or Masson, probably is how you pronounce his name. He was the guy that owned the beach house. He says that that Meursault was an honest and decent person. The Salamano, he actually makes a reappearance here as he's brought to the stand. He was saying that hardly anyone listened to Solomano either when he recalled how I'd been good to his dog, and when he answered a question about my mother and me by saying I'd run out of things to say to Maman, and that was why I put her in the home. You must understand, Solomano kept saying. You must understand. But no one seemed to understand, and he was ushered out. Also, his other friend, the restaurant owner Celeste, he also testifies on his behalf. Also, saying that he was, they were in that he was a good person, that kind of stuff. These are all, as Dusty mentioned before. None of these are like exculpatory testimonies, but they are intended to sort of counter the narrative that Meursault was just this kind of free floating menace, this sort of like just personification of evil and it was that kind of thing.
I mean, I would argue that their relevance as witnesses are just as important as the people from the nursing home or Mr. Perez, which is to say they're not.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like if the trial is about what kind of person, Meursault is, then they are fitting witnesses to like if the prosecution is making the claim that him not crying at his mother's funeral makes him an irredeemable human being, then these other people have their perceptions of him ought to be as or more valid because they are people that he dealt with more than just the one time, pretty much.
Yeah. It's... I don't know. I don't really know how much more I can say about the trial without repeating myself, because really the point of the matter is that it's just a gross like misuse of the justice system in order to sentence a man to death. And I guess whether or not you think he deserves death that's a different question in and of itself. But I whether or not he deserved death doesn't change the fact that how the jury was persuaded to come to that was inappropriate, unethical, and a bastardization of a justice system.
Frankly, it was very just depressing and kind of, it was just like, this is just so dumb, and it's just depressing to watch it work.
Yeah, I had no inclination on him getting any favorable sentencing, even after the trial was over and his lawyer was talking to him, and he's like, "Yeah, I think we did really well. I think that this is gonna come in our favor. I think you're gonna get a couple of years of prison or hard labor, and that'll be that." And even after the defense lawyer's final argument, his colleagues are just like, "Oh my God, that was amazing," and they congratulated Meursault and all that. And even during all that, I'm just like, yeah, no, this is gonna go horribly for him, because this prosecutor basically just did his Bible thumping Southern Baptist sermon that clearly is gonna sway the jury here, and lo and behold, they give him the death penalty for it. It's like, Jesus, like, come on, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very true. Yeah, I did not. I was thinking that while the defense guy, I guess he did all that he really could do in this sort of like fact-free zone, But it's just I shared even during my first read, I was like, yeah, there is no way that's getting that's going anywhere. The prosecutors got this in the bag.
Yeah.
There was something else. Just one last thing I wanted to say that I thought was kind of interesting. It was it's the thing where the prosecutor cites Meursault's intelligence, and it says he tries to use that as evidence of it being a premeditated murder, and then Meursault is like, isn't it so strange that what would be considered a good quality in a under a normal circumstance is condemning me here, essentially something like that.
Yeah, it's just more of a just finger pointing at nothing to come to the conclusion that he's a monster. Anything to win a case, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Got to get those prosecution numbers up. So the final chapter of the book is Meursault in his cell, essentially trying to come to terms with his pending execution, and going back and forth between having hope or having no hope at getting an appeal. And he's visited by the chaplain who he's been avoiding, and we get this just massive theological debate between the two of them, and
this is probably the most emotion that Meursault shows in the entire book.
Yeah, there's so much nihilism in this chapter from Meursault, and I'd argue that there's been a lot of nihilism throughout his character in the entire book, going back to Marie asking if he loves her, and he's like, I don't, but it doesn't matter. He has this very nihilistic look on life, and we do kind of culminate into peak nihilism at the end of this novel here. But you have this debate where the chaplain is basically saying, turn to God, God will save you. All of these other prisoners who have been sentenced to death all eventually turn to God. This is your only way to have some final sense of righteousness in your final moments. And Meursault is over here being like, there is no point, because there's nothing here. Like, whether I die now, tomorrow, or in 20 years doesn't change the fact that I'm going to die. I will die. That is an absolute certainty. The question is only when and how, and that doesn't matter. So what's the point? Like, it's this existentialist, we are nothing compared to the universe, so there is no meaning kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's absurdism. I think is but it's very, they're interlinked, yes.
And I do think that there definitely is some merit of points to take away from his findings of the whole. Like, it is true that we're all going to die. That is an absolute fact of life. To live is to die, and it always comes down to when. And so, yeah, I find it I find the conclusion to be kind of opposite to him, though, where his whole thing is, it doesn't matter because I am going to die, so what's the point? I might as well just accept that death is going to come for me, and just accept it regardless of when it happens, and just understand the meaninglessness of life as a whole. Whereas, like, I agree and disagree, to where it's like, yes, you only have control of your life as much as while you have it, and death can come suddenly or eventually. It is kind of just random. But I find that's more of a reason to try and find more of a meaning to live, because of its finality, because of its somewhat meaninglessness. Whereas he's just kind of given up and just... I don't want to say given up. It's more like he's accepted the reality of death and is essentially just sitting down and waiting for it to come to him, as opposed to doing everything he can to squeeze as much out of life as he can before it happens. He's just been like, well, it's going to happen, so come on then.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of like an interesting, there's like it's not a book. Well, it is a book that he wrote, but Camus also wrote a book called it's The Myth of Sisyphus is what it's called, and it's essentially kind of, it's closer to what you're saying. Is like that. This book is Meursault's perspective of just like this sort of like true nihilistic acceptance of like yeah, I'm gonna die at some point. So the details really do not matter. And
Yeah.
the idea about that Camus wrote about in the myth of Sisyphus is about finding meaning in your absurd life, and how then to live a life when you realize there is no meaning.
Yeah. Meursault kind of has that stereotypical, the argument that not Christians, but theists, I guess, because I don't want to just say strictly Christians, because this goes beyond that. But that stereotypical argument that theists have towards atheists, to where it's like, oh well, if you don't believe in afterlife or heaven or hell or whatever, and you don't believe that there's a point to life, then why don't you just kill yourself? And that's kind of how I feel. Not so much the why don't you kill yourself bit, but I feel like that's kind of how Meursault kind of is looking at it, to where he's like, well, there's no point to life, so I might as well just wait for death. And I once again, I feel like that's the wrong way to look at it. Whether or not you believe in any form of religion, I don't think having a belief or not having a belief makes a difference towards you feeling like there is any form of meaning in living life. And I think he kind of fell into that trap of life is meaningless, so what's the point? When my take on it, like I said a minute ago, is if there's not a point, you kind of have to make your own and get the most out of this. Because if you look at it from an atheist standpoint, if you look at it from a Christian, I'll start with a Christian standpoint. If you look at it from a Christian standpoint, and I'm gonna narrow this down purely to Christianity, because I don't want to go any more broad than that right now. You have heaven and hell as an afterlife. So the point as a Christian is to live a righteous, good Christian life, so that you will be rewarded with eternity in the afterlife with heaven, as opposed to living in sin and wickedness and being damned to hell.
Well, there's also the bit about having to it's not just that component, but there's also the component of accepting the precepts of Christianity. The God is God, Jesus is his son, Jesus made the sacrifice. All the part of the is accepting like the precepts of the story of the Gospels.
Yeah. So you have all of that, and that's your reason for that's your meaning to life, is you live life in order to achieve heaven in the afterlife. And at least the way that I see it from an atheist standpoint, you would see it as, in a more optimistic sense, you would see it as, well, after life there's only death, and death is nothing. So wouldn't the better way to look at it be, if this is the only life you have to live, and after it there is nothing, wouldn't it be better to just live the absolute best life you could and get everything that you can, every single personal meaning you can wring out of life before your death? That way you have achieved a somewhat, not a perfect life, but like one that you can be happy with when you die, as opposed to just the more pessimistic view of there's no meaning, therefore I'm just going to kill myself. I don't know. I've always kind of hated that argument, and I feel like I said, that's what kind of Meursault kind of falls into, the trap he falls into with the whole atheistic outlook of a meaningless life. I don't know if I got my point across or not, but yeah.
No, and I think that's kind of why the myth of Sisyphus kind of exists. It came out in that same year, and it is kind of like the other perspective, closer to what you're saying, is like the idea of the answering the question, okay, so if there is no meaning to life, then why not kill yourself? And the thesis that he argues in the myth of Sisyphus is like, okay, here's why you should not. Here's why, despite life being meaningless, this is this is why you must live your life. And it's closer to what you're saying there.
Yeah, so I do feel like that's another tick on the character flaw of Meursault, that he does fall into that. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like the chaplain also, he's letting his self-righteousness get in the way of his duty as a chaplain. Like he's taking it so personally, and it almost feels like he himself has taken up the mantle of God to tell Meursault that this is how you need to be, this is how you should be. He's almost like he's kind of overstepping his bounds as a chaplain, because of his ego, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's that. And there's also the and it's a little bit of an ego thing, and it's a little bit of and I think that we can see that, and when he asks, why haven't you come to see me? It's like, well, who are you? Who are you to me? I don't, it's not a it becomes a little bit about the chaplain, as he's like, as his status is being called into, he feels his status is being called into question, and his importance is being called into question by Meursault's, he's perceiving it as him slighting him. And again, this is kind of like one last reflection of that theme of Meursault not playing the game has condemned him.
Yeah. It's almost like we have a debate between the imperfect atheist and the imperfect Christian.
Which is, one of the reasons why it's a good novel. It's, these two imperfect people, stating their positions imperfectly.
Yeah, and both of them standing on their own perceived high ground of superiority or of morality.
Yeah.
It's off a chaplain. I have the high ground.
Don't make me proselytize to you.
Don't try it.
It's really good. I like the like is a weird word to use, because it is a very dark chapter in a lot of ways. It's like this condemned man, really coming to grips with the fact that his life will end. He is about to meet a violent end, and he's trapped, and and also his own view of like life being meaningless. On top of that, it is very heavy. So, like is a bit of an odd word to use there, but I think it's very well done and very well written, and it gives you you have a really profound appreciation for this moment.
Yeah, I this is so inappropriate to the theme of the novel and the characters, but the whole time I'm sitting there, I couldn't help but think back to, because I'm sitting there looking at this, I'm like, this dude is such a nihilist, and I don't feel like this was appropriate, like I said, but I just think back to, you think he's gonna mind? Oh, he doesn't care. He's a nihilist. Oh, that sounds exhausting. I just kept going back to The Big Lebowski.
Well, I think the Lebowski is kind of within this tradition that Camus is kind of a little bit pioneering here, is the idea of the absurd,
Yeah, that is fair, and this is more of a I don't want, it's a psychological drama, I guess, for lack of a better term, where something like Lebowski is an absurdist comedy.
Yeah.
Which, side note, I saw somebody once make an argument that The Big Lebowski is not a comedy, and I was just like, in what world?
Maybe if you don't have like any kind of understanding of humor. I'm not saying that you have to find it funny, but like if you have any understanding of like setup, how the setup of jokes, or like the vocabulary of how comedy works, you cannot deny that the infrastructure exists in the movie.
Yeah, they argued it was like a crime drama with funny moments in it, and it's just like, I don't think you understand genre film, because
no, you got those things reversed there.
Yeah, exactly. But back to the topic at hand, though. I do feel like this final chapter does a good way of being a little capsule of my thoughts of the novel as a whole, in that I respect it, I understand it, but I didn't love it.
Well, and I think that's okay. I don't think you have to love the book. I think what's more important here, and like love is love to become Meursault here for a second. I think the love, it doesn't really matter, and it's beside the point. I think the point of it is, like what we gained from it. It was like this. We were not necessarily trying to interact with it as an entertainment product. That's kind of this sort of like ultra commodified way that a lot of people can look at like art. But it's rather it's supposed to be it's not just like that. Although there is dressing of it and it is like engaging, but it's more, it exists as like a philosophical treatise almost, about the meaninglessness of life, and about how society treats people that do not fall within the norms, that kind of thing. That I think that was more important than the raw entertainment value. And I think that was that. So, and I think Camus, that would, if you were to ask him, that would be the idea. Is like, it's, yes, he is trying to engage you with this story, and that's why he tells it in the form of a story. But the ideas are more important than the entertainment value.
Yeah, and maybe love was too strong of a word to use. I do think that it is important to read things that you may not necessarily end up liking in the end, but yeah, it's more important to get the message and the takeaway from it than it is to get any personal enjoyment or entertainment out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how I feel about this book. I didn't not enjoy it, but it definitely is not a book that I would have gone out of my way to read without this you and I doing the book club and all that. So, once again, that's a really big positive for doing this, is it is taking me out of my wheelhouse, where I'm not just strictly sitting in sci-fi fantasy and nerding out over books like that constantly, and actually broadening my horizon, so to say. But yeah, like I said, I don't want to go. I don't think it's something as simple as whether you enjoyed or didn't enjoy this book, because it's kind of like you said, that isn't the point. And I don't want to say that I didn't enjoy it, but I also don't want to say that I did enjoy it. It's so strange. It's such a weird place to be. It's
turned you into Meursault.
Maybe.
I'm just kidding. It's just the. But yeah, I think it is kind of strange. Sometimes that's how you kind of walk away from books. Sometimes it's like what it leaves you with is not necessarily like a feeling of resolution of like, oh man, what a ripping yarn, or like, man, that story was so stupid. I can't believe I wasted my time. It's to leave you with thoughts and questions, and I think that's what it does in a pretty masterful way.
Yeah, it's certainly no Leviathan Wakes, but at the same time, it's also no Twilight.
Fair. I think that is a correct assessment of the book.
Yeah. So, final thoughts, Daniel?
I thought I liked this book. I really enjoyed it both times I've read it. I think the ideas that it presents are very salient even today. I think just when you look at the way society treats, just watch the how and why people are demonized, and you will realize the truth a lot of this novel. Like to pull an example from history really quick. Nixon got caught up in the Watergate scandal, right? But to my thinking, that was maybe the least of his crimes. He was not reviled because of his going behind the back of the current U.S. administration, the Johnson administration, to sabotage the peace talks, in the lead up to the election. it wasn't his expansion of the war into broadening the Vietnam War. It was this perceived impropriety of this bungled the bungled burglary that really didn't seem to gain him any real actionable intelligence that really cost him. This is what led people to turn on him. So it's just and in more recent times you could apply this. Don't forget that initially the Bush administration was very popular because they knew that Donald Rumsfeld was on the people's they thought he was like this big, cool, charismatic, nice guy, because of how he played the game. He fit in with the societal norms. It was so his crimes, abetting the Iraq War, perhaps the greatest crime of the 21st century. That it wasn't until much later, when society had shifted on that point, that actually became something that people talked about. But until then, he and the rest of the Bush administration were very popular. In 2002, People magazine named Donald Rumsfeld as one of the sexiest men alive. That's just crazy if you think about it. So that's just kind of something I would encourage readers and I guess listeners of this podcast to take away, is you to see how fitting in to the societal norms will save you, and irrespective of the facts, but deviating from societal norms is what will condemn you. That's one of my big takeaways here. I enjoyed the book. I highly encourage people who have not read the book to read the book, or if you have read the book and it's been a while, to reread the book like I have. It's very good, and I enjoyed our discussion.
The Sad Boys Book Club is not sponsored by George Soros or the Democratic National Convention. Yeah, I think you definitely hit it pretty hard on the head there with this book. I guess I'm a little more lukewarm toward it than you, at least as a whole. Like I said, I understand it and I respect it, and I do think it is important. I think that I felt like, I think I even said this in the last episode, that I might need part 2 to really kind of figure out this book, because going off of just part 1 really didn't feel complete. And obviously, of course, but yeah, I do think the context of part 2 really did help kind of shape this book for me. As you know, at this point, I'm going to throw a number rating on it, but this one is kind of hard for me. So I don't like doing half ratings personally. I feel like a book is either, a 6, a 7, 8, a 9, or a 10. I don't like these 0.5s personally, because how do you quantify that? But I find myself really stuck between a 6 and a 7 on this book, which, if you remember, I did give House of Leaves a 7 as well. And with that book, there was a lot of enjoyment I could pull out of it, which I don't think is necessarily relevant in comparison to this one. But I feel like that it is a distinction worth pointing out, that I did have a lot of the House of Leaves that I had a lot of enjoyment in, but there was also similarly a lot of things that I hated in it. So it did hurt it for me in that respect. So I don't know, with this I'm really torn between a 6 and a 7. I think I'm going to round up and give it a 7 out of 10 as a whole.
I think it deserves it based on the strength of the ideas.
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm struggling so much between those two, is because the ideas it posits and the meaning that you can pull from it is very, very well done. It's very well written, very well translated would be the way to put it, because we're not reading it in its original language. So credit to what's his name? Is it Matt Walsh? Matthew Ward. So credit to Matthew Ward for his translation, because I can only assume that it holds Camus' original intent in it, at least that's how I feel it does through what I've been able to take from it. So yeah, I feel like it did do a really great job in getting a point across the point that Camus was trying to make in a story that may not necessarily have been the most interesting being told, at least at face value. So I think I do want to leave it at a 7 for me. But at the same time, it is something that I would recommend if you want to have a deeper look into more not really uncomfortable, but some more like unorthodox themes or topics. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I can't really come to a final conclusion, just which feels kind of apt given that the book itself doesn't really come to a final conclusion. We're just kind of left waiting, so to say.
Well, that's fair. I think that is kind of how you're supposed to feel walking away, is like this sort of unsettled ambiguity.
Yeah, I think that wraps up The Stranger for us.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've gained something from this. I really enjoyed the book, and I guess we'll see you next time. This has been Daniel.
And I'm Dusty.
And this has been another episode of the Sad Boys Book Club. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Take care.